Hello all, in this video we are going to code this simple function, are correctly closed, which returns true for expressions which are correctly closed. These expressions, for simplicity, we assume that the expressions passed as strings into the function are always built with only two, possibly from two building blocks, basic building blocks, which are left and right parentheses. So as we can see here, for this expression we should return true. For such an expression we also should return true because we can nest parentheses, but once they're not properly closed we should return false. So let's jump directly to our test. I have one test here which is working now. As you can see, Jest is running the tests on every change. So let me write the first failing test. So we should return true for an empty expression. This is how this would be defined. It should, let me change the name of the test, it returns true for an empty string. And our test is failing. That's great. We can just return true. Okay. And I think now we could write another test that has to fail. So let's return false for an expression for such expression. So if the expression is only one character and it's an opening parentheses, we should return false. As I can see, the first test is actually incorrect. It should be true. Okay, let's see if the first test doesn't work. Are correctly closed returns true. That's a bit weird. Okay, it runs correctly. It passes. Yeah, so we can go back to our algorithm. So let's see, this one does not work because, well, we could do something very simple. If our expression is of odd length, we could just return false, right? So if slength modulo 2 equals 1, then we return false. This is a very, it doesn't look like a proper algorithm, but I think it should work. Also, we could write another test now where length of the string will be odd, but it should still return false. For example, this is not a properly closed expression and we should return false here. And we do return false. Let me see why. This is a bit weird. This should not return false. And it doesn't. Yep. So we return false for this expression. We should, but we are not. So now we could think about a more complicated, a more generic algorithm. So let's see what's the problem here. Let's see that if we had this here or this here, then our expression would work. So we can see that if there's no, like, the number of parentheses left and right in an expression is not equal, then we always return false. If they're equal, like here, if we have two opening parentheses and two closing parentheses, then we should return true. So let's try to do it. To do that, we could split our string into characters. Let's split it this way. This method will return an array of characters and just iterate through these characters. So let me use cars. Let's rename it to C. So we will also define two variables. Okay. And number of closing parentheses. So let's have a check here. If C equals opening parentheses, we will increment the number of opening parentheses. Else, we will increment number of closing parentheses. At the end of our function, we will check if number of opening parentheses equals number of closing parentheses. And we will just return this condition. So this should make our tests run correctly, and they do. All tests are passing. So now we have to think if this is correct. Let's see at such an expression. So I would say that we should still return false for such an expression. And we are not doing that. Why we're not doing that? The thing is that both left and right parentheses, the number of them is equal. It's 1 and 1, but they're not open properly. There's another condition hidden in this task, which is if we start at the beginning and we go one by one, let me show it in a bigger example. In every moment when we iterate through the characters in the string, number of left parentheses should never be strictly smaller than the number of right parentheses, right? So for example, we start here, this expression is incorrect. This expression is correct. Again, this expression is incorrect because we have 2 opening parentheses and 1 closing parentheses. This is correct, and so on and so on and so on. So another example. So what I think we could add is just another if statement here, which would check that number of left parentheses, of opening parentheses, is strictly, well, if it's strictly smaller than the number of closing parentheses, we should return false. And I would argue that we have a correctly coded method. Let me add another test, maybe a bit bigger, just to ensure that's the case. Let me take this example. We should return false for this one, and for nested parentheses like this, we should return true. We are not returning true, which is a big problem. Let me see why. Let's run it again. Yes, we are doing that. So we just had to refresh the test, and this is it. This is how you can code this method with some simple logic, a few if statements, and a loop.